he had erased her for the last time. In 7 years, at 34 formal events, Kang Dae-hyun had seated his wife, Min-hee, at a table in the back, a table for the unimportant. Tonight, at the Grand Hyatt, for the annual summit of the 5 families of Seoul, she had made herself absent. The empty chair at table 17 was a quiet, geometric void in the glittering ballroom, a space that pulled at the corner of his eye. He had dismissed it first as a delay, then an inconvenience, then an insult. But as the hours bled into one another, a colder feeling began to crystallize in his gut. It was the feeling of a foundation stone being silently withdrawn. The finality of it came not from his own mind, but from the mouth of his oldest rival, Chairman Yoon, a man whose observations were as sharp and merciless as surgical steel. As the night waned, Yoon approached him by the panoramic windows overlooking the sprawling jeweled city. He did not look at Dae-hyun, but at the reflection of the room in the glass. 10 words, Yoon said, his voice holding not contempt, but a kind of clinical pity. You showed everyone the jewel, then you hid the vault. Then he walked away, leaving Dae-hyun to chase the meaning of those words as they unspooled the world he thought he owned. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The promise of the chase was not yet clear. All that was clear was the performance. The room was a theater of power, and Kang Dae-hyun was its lead actor. He was Chairman Kang, head of the Orion Group, a conglomerate whose clean face of construction and logistics was built on the unseen bones of his father's organization. He was 42 years old, tailored to perfection in a custom Brioni suit that cost more than the car most of his employees drove. He moved through the gilded space with an economy of motion that bespoke absolute authority. A nod here, a brief handshake there, a low murmured word that could shift the fortunes of a port or a politician. The air was thick with the scent of money, a cloying mix of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the faint, metallic tang of fear. He performed his duties with the precision of a master craftsman. He soothed the anxieties of the timid shipping magnate from Incheon. He brokered a truce between 2 hot-headed lieutenants from Busan. He listened, or appeared to listen, to the endless, self-serving monologues of government officials whose palms he had greased for a decade. Every interaction was a transaction, a calibration of leverage. He was good at this. He was better than his father had been. His father had ruled with fists and fury. Dae-hyun ruled with spreadsheets and silence. He had built an empire of quiet, interlocking dependencies, a machine of immense and profitable complexity. He believed he was the architect and the engineer of it all. He believed every gear turned at his command. The thought of Min-hee, a soft, recurring dissonance, was an irritation. Her place was arranged. Her function was simple, to be his wife, to exist in the space he allotted for her. That she had failed this simple duty tonight was a disruption to the perfect order of things. He would deal with it later, with a cold word, a clipped reprimand. He would reassert the proper geometry of their lives. He made his way through the crowd, his face an impassive mask. Men bowed slightly as he passed. He was a creature of immense control, the apex predator of this particular jungle. But the empty chair at table 17 was more than an absence. It was an answer to a question he had never thought to ask. It was the beginning of an education. There is what is shown, and there is what is seen. For 7 years he had shown everyone his power. He had not once seen its source. The night concluded not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, courteous goodbyes that were themselves a form of currency. Dae-hyun stood at the exit of the ballroom, accepting the fealty of his peers and subordinates. His driver, Mr. Oh, a man of 50 with a face as still as a stone carving, was waiting with the door of the black Genesis G90 open. The ride home was silent. Dae-hyun stared out at the blurred lights of Seoul, the city he considered his own. He was composing the words he would use for Min-hee. Not angry, but disappointed. A tone that communicated his displeasure as a failing on her part, a lapse in understanding her role. Their apartment was a penthouse in the exclusive Tower Palace, a fortress of glass and steel in the heart of Gangnam. It was a space designed to announce his arrival, curated with expensive, impersonal art and furniture that looked better than it felt. It was a space Min-hee had made into a home, a detail he had never consciously registered. The silence that met him as he entered was different from the usual quiet. It was not a peaceful silence. It was a hollow one. The air was still. The faint scent of the peony and white tea diffuser she favored was gone. "Min-hee?" he called out, his voice unnaturally loud in the void. No answer. He walked through the living area, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the thick wool rug. The lights were off, save for a single lamp on a side table. It illuminated a small cream-colored envelope placed dead center on the polished surface of the table. His name was written on it in her neat, precise script. Kang Dae-hyun. Not my husband, not Dae-hyun, but his full formal name. It was the way one addressed a stranger or a business associate. He felt a prickle of annoyance. This was theatrical. He tore it open. The note inside was not a letter. It was a single sheet of heavy paper with 2 lines of text. The first was an address, an old building in a commercial district of Busan he didn't recognize. The second line was a simple instruction. Ask for the ledger of accounts for the Heron's Nest. That was it. No explanation. No apology for her absence. No, "I've left you." Just an address and an instruction. It felt less like a note from a wife and more like a directive from a superior. The sheer, infuriating presumption of it lit a fire in his chest. She was telling him what to do. Him. He crumpled the note in his fist, the thick paper resisting. His first instinct was to ignore it, to find her, to drag her back and put her in her place. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact for Mr. Cho, his head of security, the man who could find anyone. But something stopped him. A flicker of memory. Chairman Yoon's words. You showed everyone the jewel, then you hid the vault. The vault, a place where things of value are kept. He smoothed the note out on the table, his anger receding into a cold, unsettling curiosity. Busan, a 4-hour drive. What in God's name was in Busan? He walked into their bedroom, and the cold curiosity turned into a blade of ice in his stomach. Her closet was open. Half of it was empty, not ransacked, not cleared in a hurry. The empty hangers were perfectly spaced. Her shoes were gone, the expensive, impractical ones he'd bought for her. Her jewelry box was on the dresser, open. The gaudy diamonds and emeralds he'd gifted her, tokens of his wealth, were all there. But the simple pearl necklace her mother had given her was gone. On his side of the bed, on his pillow, was another item. Her wedding ring. A modest platinum band he had chosen 17 years ago, before the empire, before the money. It sat there, small and unassuming, a perfect circle of condemnation. She hadn't thrown it. She hadn't hidden it. She had placed it where he would be forced to see it, to touch it, to reckon with it. This was not an act of passion. This was a plan, meticulous, deliberate, silent. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the mattress giving way. The silence of the apartment was no longer hollow. It was full. It was full of her absence, an absence that was beginning to feel like a presence, a weight. He looked at the crumpled note in his hand, then at the ring on his pillow. For the first time in a very long time, Kang Dae-hyun did not know what to do next. The machine had a broken gear, or rather, the engineer had just discovered the machine was never what he thought it was. The dawn broke gray and indifferent over the city. Dae-hyun had not slept. He had sat in the silent living room, the crumpled note and the wedding ring on the table before him like artifacts from a ruined civilization. He had tried to piece it together, to apply the same cold logic he applied to business problems. Assumption: Min-hee has left. Question: why? Hypothesis: she was unhappy. But that felt too simple, too sentimental. Min-hee was not a sentimental woman. She was pragmatic, grounded, the most emotionally stable person he knew. He had always considered it a useful, if unexciting, trait. Now, he was forced to reconsider. Perhaps her stability was not passivity. Perhaps it was a form of strength he had never bothered to measure. At 6 a.m., his personal phone, the one reserved for the highest echelons of his world, began to ring. It was a cascade. The first call was from Director Song of Haejin Shipping, the magnate from Incheon he had soothed just hours before. Chairman Kong, Song's voice was strained. I regret to inform you that we will be suspending our exclusive logistics contract with Oryong, effective immediately. Dae-hyun was stunned into silence for a beat. Director Song, this is abrupt. We have a decade of partnership. What is the meaning of this? A personal reconsideration of our risk portfolio, Chairman. My apologies. The line went dead. Before he could even process the financial implications, a loss of nearly 15% of his logistics revenue, the phone rang again. This time, it was a text message from a blocked number. A contact he knew belonged to a deputy minister in the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, and Transport. The message was 5 words. Your port expansion bid is stalled. Stalled. Not denied. Stalled. An indefinite limbo that was, in the world of government contracts, a death sentence. The bid was worth hundreds of millions. It was the cornerstone of Oryong's 5-year growth plan. He had spent 2 years and a small fortune in political donations to secure it. He stared at the message, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. This was not a coincidence. This was coordinated. The third call was the one that broke him. It was from Chairman Yoon. Dae-hyun. Yoon's voice was flat, devoid of the pity from the night before. It was the voice of a businessman stating a fact. The 5 families are convening an emergency council. Without you. We are concerned about the stability of the Oryong Group. Stability? Dae-hyun's voice was tight, a wire about to snap. My group is as stable as it has ever been. There was a pause. He could hear Yoon sigh, a sound of profound weariness. No, Dae-hyun, it is not. You see, for the last 5 years, when we have had difficulties, when our wives needed reassurance, when our reckless sons got into trouble they could not talk their way out of, when a delicate negotiation required a touch that was not yours, who do you think we called? The question hung in the air, heavy and damning. Dae-hyun had no answer. He knew his lieutenants handled such things. Park, mostly. Your wife, Yoon said, his voice quiet but devastating. We called your wife. She never told you. She smoothed things over. She managed the relationships. She understood that our world is not just built on contracts and threats. It is built on family, on trust. The trust, my friend, was with her. Now that she is gone, we must reassess. The line clicked. Dae-hyun lowered the phone. He felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He looked around the vast, empty apartment, the art on the walls, the marble floors, the panoramic view of his city. It was all a stage set, a performance. and the stage manager had just walked off the job, taking the entire production with her. He thought of Min-hee, not as the quiet, unassuming woman at the back of the room, but as a master strategist, moving pieces on a board he didn't even know existed. She had not just managed his home, she had managed his world. She had been the silent guarantor of his power. The vault. He finally understood. The jewel was the empire he showed the world. The vault was Min-hee, who held the actual treasure, the trust, the loyalty, the intricate web of human connection that made it all possible. And he had not just hidden her, he had dismissed her. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his own strength. His anger from the night before was gone, replaced by a terrifying, hollow clarity. He was not in control. He may never have been. He picked up the crumpled note from the table, the address in Busan, the ledger. It was no longer an infuriating directive. It was a clue. It was the first step on a path she had laid for him. This was not just an escape. It was a lesson, and the tuition was his entire world. The morning of full discovery began with a tour of his own home. He walked from room to room, not as its owner, but as an investigator at the scene of a crime he had committed against himself. He had lived in this space for 5 years, but he was seeing it for the first time. He started in her study, a room he had entered perhaps a dozen times. He had always considered it her little hobby space. It was a small room, tucked away behind the kitchen, with a single window overlooking an unprepossessing courtyard. He had offered to have it renovated, to make it grander, but she had politely refused, saying she liked it as it was. The room was sparse, almost monastic, a simple wooden desk, a comfortable but not luxurious chair, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. He ran his hand along the spines of the books. He had assumed they were novels, romances, the things women read. He was wrong. There were books on forensic accounting, treatises on contract law, biographies of political figures, volumes on art history, books on urban planning, even a well-worn copy of Machiavelli's The Prince. On her desk was a single closed laptop. He did not have the password. Next to it was a stack of notebooks, the simple, cheap kind you could buy in any stationery store. He opened the top one. Her script, the same neat, precise hand from the note, filled the pages. It was not a diary, it was a log. Dates, names, summaries of conversations. Met with Mrs. Song. Her son has a gambling problem again. Arranged a private counselor. Director Song will be grateful. Lunch with the wife of Deputy Minister Kim. She is concerned about the optics of the port deal. Suggested Oryong sponsor a new children's wing at the public hospital, a gesture of goodwill. Call from Chairman Yoon's office. A dispute between 2 of his crews in Ulsan. Spoke to both wives. They will talk to their husbands. A family matter, not a business one. Page after page, it chronicled a hidden world of emotional labor and strategic social management. She was the organization's unofficial diplomat, its confessor, its fixer of all things human. He saw his own name mentioned occasionally. Daehyun is focused on the numbers for the quarterly report. He does not need to be troubled by this. Not troubled by this. He had mistaken her protection for his own peace of mind. He had thought the waters were calm because he was a good captain, not realizing she was below the surface, single-handedly fighting off the sharks. He closed the notebook, his hand trembling slightly. He felt a wave of something he couldn't name. It was more than shock. It was a profound, systemic vertigo, the feeling of realizing the map you've been using your entire life is of a different country altogether. He moved to the kitchen. He had a cook, of course, a woman who came in daily, but Min-hee had always loved to cook on weekends. He opened the pantry. It was organized with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. Spices arranged alphabetically, cans with their labels all facing forward. But there was a section he had never noticed, on a low shelf. Jars of homemade kimchi, gochujang, doenjang. Each jar was labeled not just with the date, but with a name. For Mr. O's mother. For the security team, winter shift. For Park Jin-woo, he likes it extra spicy. Park Jin-woo. His most trusted director. His right-hand man. The one he was grooming to be his successor. Min-hee had been making kimchi for him. A small, intimate gesture. He felt a pang of something that might have been jealousy, but it was quickly replaced by confusion. Why was everything she did a secret? Or was it not a secret, but something he had simply failed to pay attention to? Attention. That was the word. He had never truly paid her any. He had provided for her, housed her, clothed her. He had performed the role of a husband as he understood it, a provider. He had never considered that her role was something more than a recipient of his provision. He concluded his tour back in the master bedroom. He stood before her empty closet. He saw now that the clothes remaining were all the ones he had bought for her. The flashy designer dresses, the brightly colored silks, the things that announced his wealth. The things she had worn to the events where he sat her in the back. They were costumes for a role she had been playing. The clothes that were gone, he now realized, were her clothes. Simple, elegant, comfortable pieces in muted colors. The clothes of a woman who was not on display. A woman who was comfortable in her own skin. He finally allowed himself to think about her body. He had married her when she was slender, a girl of 25. Over the years, after 2 miscarriages he had treated with clinical, impatient sympathy, she had gained weight. He had seen it as a failure of discipline, an aesthetic problem. He had suggested diets, trainers. He had bought her clothes to conceal her shape. He had seated her at the back of rooms because her presence, her size, did not fit the sleek, powerful image he wanted to project. He had been ashamed of her. The thought landed with the force of a physical blow. He had been ashamed of the one person who was the bedrock of his entire existence. He looked at himself in the mirror, at the perfect suit, the expensive watch, the face that was known and feared throughout the city. He saw a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. The analysis was complete. This was not an impulsive act. This had been planned for months, perhaps years. The notebooks, the separate finances she must have had, the network of allies she had cultivated independently of him. Her departure was not a retreat. It was a strategic maneuver. And the note, the address in Busan, was not a plea to be found. It was an invitation to a reckoning. He picked up his phone and called his driver. "Mr. O, prepare the car. We are going to Busan." "Yes, Chairman." There was a slight pause. "Will Mrs. Kang be joining us?" The question was simple, respectful, but Taehyun heard the undertone. Mr. O knew. Of course he knew. She made kimchi for his mother. Everyone knew but him. "No, Mr. O," Taehyun said, his voice raw. "She will not." The 4-hour drive to Busan was a journey through a landscape of memory. As the black sedan ate up the miles on the Gyeongbu Expressway, Daehyun found himself replaying the 7 years of his marriage in his mind. But this time, he was watching a different film. He was looking for the clues he had missed, the signs he had misinterpreted. He remembered their wedding. It had been a simple affair, before the money, before the Orion Group was anything more than a glorified security firm with a few construction contracts. Her parents were gone, and his own father, a man of brutal temper and few words, had grunted his approval and then largely ignored her. He had been drawn to her quiet competence. Her family's business had been drowning in debt, a debt owed to his father's organization. He had been sent to collect, or to break things. He had expected tears, pleading. Instead, he had found Min-hee, then 25, in a small, cluttered office surrounded by ledgers. She had calmly laid out a repayment plan, complete with interest calculations and a proposal for liquidating assets. She had negotiated with him, not as a victim, but as a peer. He had been so impressed by her mind, her composure, that he had convinced his father to accept the terms. He had started finding excuses to see her, to discuss the repayment plan. He told himself it was business, but it was the stillness in her that drew him. In his world of loud, aggressive men, her quiet confidence was an oasis. He had mistaken her calm for pliability. He thought she would be an easy wife, a woman who would not challenge him, who would manage his home while he built his empire. He had proposed 6 months later. She had accepted with a simple, unadorned yes. There was no giddy excitement, just a steady look in her eyes, a look that he now realized was not adoration, but assessment. She was assessing him, weighing him, and for reasons he could no longer fathom, she had found him acceptable. The early years had been good, or he had thought they were good. They lived in a modest apartment. He was working 18-hour days, transforming his father's thuggish enterprise into a legitimate corporation. She was his silent partner in that. She managed the books. She hosted dinners for potential clients in their small home, creating an atmosphere of warmth and trust that his own aggressive nature could not. She made him seem more human, more reliable. He remembered one night, early on, when a deal had fallen through. He had come home, furious, and smashed a vase against the wall. He had expected her to be frightened, to cry. Instead, she had quietly swept up the pieces, made him a cup of tea, and then sat down with him and talked through the deal, pointing out the flaws in his strategy, the cultural missteps he had made with the other party. She had not judged him. She had helped him. She had made him better. Where had that changed? The money had come, slowly at first, then in a flood. They moved to a larger apartment, then to the penthouse. He hired staff, a cook, a cleaner, a driver. He had told her she no longer needed to work. He had meant it as a gift, a sign of his success. "You can relax now," he had said. "I will take care of everything." He saw it now, in the sterile silence of the sedan. He hadn't liberated her. He had dismissed her. He had taken away her purpose, her role in their shared enterprise, and replaced it with the empty title of chairman's wife. He had put her on a shelf, an object to be admired from a distance, and then, as her body changed, an object to be hidden. The miscarriages. He winced at the memory. He had been clinical. He had arranged the best doctors. He had told her, "We can try again." He had treated it as a logistical failure, a project that had not come to fruition. He had never once asked her how she felt. He had never held her while she wept. He had been in a meeting when she called from the hospital the second time. He had told his secretary to handle it. The memory was so shameful it made him physically ill. He had built a wall of taking care of things around himself, a wall that prevented him from having to feel anything, a wall that had left her utterly alone in her grief. That was when she had started to gain weight. It was not a failure of discipline. It was a shield. It was armor. Her body was the one thing he could not control, the one part of her life he could not manage or arrange. And so he had punished her for it. The dinners, the events, the seating arrangements, table 17. It wasn't just at the back of the room. It was always a table of people who didn't matter. Junior staff, distant relatives, wives of low-level functionaries. He had isolated her, surrounded her with people who would not engage her in substantive conversation, ensuring she remained a silent, smiling fixture. He had done it 34 times. He had kept a mental tally, a cruel accounting of his own casual brutality. He had thought he was protecting his image, but he had been strangling his own heart. The car slowed, turning off the highway into the sprawling, gritty port city of Busan. Mr. O navigated the narrow, congested streets with practiced ease. The address on the note led them to an old, 5-story building in a district of warehouses and small maritime businesses. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and fish. It was a world away from the gleaming towers of Gangnam. "Wait here," Daehan said, his voice hoarse. He got out of the car and looked up at the building. It was nondescript, its facade stained with years of sea air. He felt a profound sense of dislocation. What was Min-hee, his elegant, composed wife, doing with a place like this? He entered through a narrow door and found a dusty, unlit lobby. A handwritten sign pointed up the stairs. The address was on the 3rd floor. He took the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The door to Suite 3B was unmarked. He knocked. A moment later, the door opened a crack. An old man with a face like a dried apple peered out at him through thick glasses. "Yes?" "I am here to see the ledger of accounts for the Heron's Nest," Daehan said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. The old man's eyes flickered with something. Recognition, perhaps. He opened the door wider. "You are Kang Daehyun," he said. It was a statement, not a question. "She said you would come." The office was exactly as he had imagined it from the building's exterior. It was cramped, cluttered, and smelled of old paper and dust. Stacks of ledgers and file boxes lined the walls, reaching almost to the ceiling. A single grimy window looked out onto a brick wall. The old man, who introduced himself only as Mr. Bay, was the custodian of this place. He was an accountant, one of the old school, who worked with paper and ink, not spreadsheets and software. "She has been a client for 6 years," Mr. Bay said, shuffling over to a large metal filing cabinet. "A very good client, very precise." He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger and placed it on the single clear space on his desk. The words, "The Heron's Nest," were embossed in faded gold on the cover. Daehyun had never heard the name before. It sounded like a tea house or an inn. Mr. Bay opened the ledger. The pages were filled with neat columns of figures, all written in the same precise script as the notebooks in her study. Min-hee script. "This is a holding company," Daehyun said, his voice flat. He could see it instantly. The flow of funds, the investments, the shell corporations. It was a structure he understood intimately. He had several just like it himself. "A very discreet one," Mr. Bay confirmed. He tapped a finger on the first page. "It was established 6 years ago. The initial capital was from the sale of her mother's jewelry." Daehyun felt a jolt. He had forgotten about that. When they were first married, she had a small collection of valuable pieces from her mother. He had offered to sell them, to use the money for their life together. She had refused, saying they were all she had left of her family. She had sold them after all. Not for them, but for this, for herself. He began to turn the pages. The initial capital was small, but it had been invested with astonishing shrewdness. Small, strategic investments in tech startups, real estate in developing neighborhoods, shares in overlooked manufacturing companies. The portfolio was diverse, conservative, and brilliantly managed. Over 6 years, the initial investment had grown and grown. He did a quick, rough calculation in his head. The numbers were staggering. The Heron's Nest was worth... He had to check the figures again. It was worth nearly as much as Ordeong's legitimate, non-leveraged assets. She had built a parallel empire, a secret fortune, right under his nose. "She learned from you," Mr. Bay said quietly, as if reading his mind. She paid attention. Paid attention. The words echoed in the dusty room. She had paid attention while he was building his world, and then she had built her own. But that was not the most shocking part. He kept turning the pages, his eyes scanning the cash flow statements. He saw regular, significant withdrawals, large sums of money transferred out to various accounts. But then he noticed something else, a steady stream of income, deposits, large, regular deposits. He traced the source account numbers, and his blood ran cold. The numbers were familiar. They were from offshore accounts belonging to the Orion Group, accounts that only he and one other person had access to. Park Jin-woo, his trusted director. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He pointed to the incoming funds. Mr. Bay adjusted his glasses and peered at the ledger. "Ah, yes, the repayments. She was very insistent on documenting them." "Repayments for what?" "For the funds being siphoned from your company," the old man said, with no more emotion than if he were commenting on the weather. "Your director Park has been stealing from you for 3 years, a little at a time, from various projects. He moves the money through a series of shell companies. Your wife discovered it 2 years ago. She intercepted the funds at the final stage, before he could move them to his personal, untraceable accounts. She took the money he was stealing and put it here." Dae-hyun stared at the ledger, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Park. Loyal, steady, competent Park. The man he had mentored, the man he treated like a younger brother. A traitor. And Min-hee? She had not just discovered it. She had been fighting a silent one-woman war against him. She hadn't told him. Why hadn't she told him? "She said you would not have believed her," Mr. Bay said, again answering the unspoken question. "She said your trust in Director Park was absolute. She said you would have seen her accusation as a betrayal, not his. She knew she needed irrefutable proof." He pulled a small, sealed manila envelope from a drawer and pushed it across the desk. "This is the proof. Account statements, transfer logs, copies of forged documents. She compiled it all. She said that when you understood the ledger, you would be ready for this." Dae-hyun picked up the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. He finally understood the name. The Heron's Nest. A heron is a patient hunter. It stands perfectly still in the water, waiting for the precise moment to strike. Min-hee had been waiting. She had been gathering the stolen funds, creating a war chest, and compiling the evidence. Her departure was not about her unhappiness. It was the strike. She had left to force him to see, to force him to open this ledger, to force him to confront the betrayal he was blind to. "Why did she leave it here, with you?" Dae-hyun asked. Mr. Bay took off his glasses and began to clean them with a small cloth. "She said I was a man who believed in numbers, and numbers do not lie. She knew you would believe the numbers. She also said," he paused, putting his glasses back on, "she said you needed to come to a place that your power could not influence, a place where you were just a man asking a question. Here, you are not Chairman Kong. You are just the husband of my client." The old man's words were not meant to be cruel, but they landed with surgical precision. Dae-hyun had built a world where everyone deferred to him. Min-hee had sent him to the one place where he had no status, no leverage. She was recalibrating him. She was teaching him. He stood up, clutching the envelope. "Is there anything else?" "One more thing," Mr. Bay said. He handed Dae-hyun another small, cream-colored envelope, identical to the one he'd found in his apartment. Dae-hyun opened it. Inside was a business card. It was for an art gallery in Insadong, Seoul. The Siloam Gallery. On the back, in Min-hee's script, were 3 words. "Ask about the peonies." He drove back to Seoul himself, telling Mr. Oh to take the KTX train. He needed the solitude. He needed the 6 hours of highway to become someone else. The man who had driven down to Busan was the chairman of the Orion Group, a powerful figure angered by his wife's insubordination. The man driving back he wasn't sure. He was a man whose foundations had been pulverized. The betrayal of Park Jin-woo was a sharp, piercing wound. Park was his protege. He had spotted him 10 years ago, a sharp, ambitious young man in the planning department. He had promoted him, mentored him, trusted him with the inner workings of the entire organization. He had imagined, in the vague way one imagines the distant future, passing the reins to Park one day. He replayed years of conversations, of meetings, of shared drinks late at the office. He searched for a sign, a flicker of deceit in Park's eyes. There was nothing. Park had been the perfect lieutenant, always respectful, always competent, always anticipating his needs. He had been a mirror, reflecting back the image of the powerful, brilliant chairman that Dae-hyun wanted to see. And all the while, he had been a parasite, bleeding the company dry. The depth of the deception was sickening. But even more sickening was the realization that Min-hee had seen it. She, who he had dismissed as naive about his business, had seen the truth that he, the master strategist, had missed entirely. She had not come to him with suspicions. She had known he would defend Park. His loyalty, she had calculated, was misplaced. So she had gathered evidence, hard, irrefutable evidence. The thought was humbling in a way that no business failure ever could be. He had created an environment where his own wife could not trust him with the truth. The Salon Gallery, in Sedong. He knew the neighborhood, a warren of traditional tea houses, craft shops, and art galleries. It was a place Min-hee liked to visit. He had gone with her once, years ago, and had been bored within minutes, impatient with the slow pace, the quiet browsing. He had made an excuse and left her there, telling her to take a taxi home. Another memory that now seemed coated in shame. He arrived in Seoul as evening fell, the city's lights beginning to glitter. He didn't go home. The penthouse felt like a museum of his failures. He drove straight to Insadong. He found the Salon Gallery on a quiet side street. It was an elegant space, with a minimalist facade of dark wood and glass. He could see a few large, abstract paintings through the window, lit with a soft, warm glow. He pushed open the heavy glass door. A small bell chimed. The gallery was quiet, empty of patrons. A woman in her late 50s, with short, stylish gray hair and an elegant black dress, looked up from a desk at the back. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cultured and calm. "I am here to ask about the peonies," Dae-hyun said. The woman's expression did not change, but he saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes, the same way he had seen it in Mr. Bay's. She stood and walked towards him. "You are Kang Dae-hyun," she said, her tone as neutral as the gallery's white walls. "I am Director Choi. Please, come with me." She led him not into the main gallery space, but through a door at the back into a private viewing room. The room was simply furnished, with 2 comfortable chairs and a small table. On the far wall hung a single large painting. It was a stunning piece, a hyper-realistic oil painting of a bouquet of white peonies, their petals so delicately rendered they seemed to glow. The light in the painting was soft, ethereal. It was beautiful, and it was deeply, profoundly sad. "She bought this 6 years ago," Director Choi said, her gaze fixed on the painting. "It was the first piece she ever purchased from me. She used the money from the sale of her mother's jewelry. The same money that had funded the Heron's Nest. It was all connected." "I thought she was just another wealthy wife looking for a hobby," Director Choi continued, a note of self-reproach in her voice. "I was wrong. She had an extraordinary eye, not for what was fashionable, or for what would appreciate in value. She had an eye for what was true." Daehyun looked at the painting, at the exquisite, heartbreaking beauty of the flowers. What does this have to do with me? Everything, Director Choi said simply. She gestured for him to sit. Over the past 6 years, your wife has been one of my best clients. She has purchased 37 paintings from this gallery. Not for your home. You have never seen any of them. Daehyun frowned. Where are they? They are hanging in the homes and offices of the people who matter to your business, she said. The ones you do not see. She began to list them. A landscape by a famous artist, given as a personal gift to the wife of the Minister of Transport. An abstract sculpture for the CEO of a construction partner in Japan, a man known to be a passionate collector. A series of prints for the homes of the senior members of the 5 families. Each gift was exquisitely chosen, tailored to the specific tastes of the recipient. They were not bribes. They were gestures of culture, of respect, of relationship. Your wife built a network of influence for you, Mr. Kang, a network based on taste and goodwill. She used art to say the things that money cannot say. She laundered your reputation. She took the brute force of the Orion Group and gave it a veneer of civilization. She made you respectable. Daehyun felt a wave of dizziness. He remembered the notebooks in her study, the lunches, the meetings with the wives. It was all part of this, a silent, sophisticated campaign to bolster his empire from the shadows. The peonies? He asked, his voice low. Why the peonies? In traditional Korean symbolism, the peony represents wealth, honor, and nobility, Director Choi explained. But the white peony also symbolizes apology and the grief of losing a loved one. She looked from him to the painting. She bought this after her second miscarriage. She told me it was because it was the most honest painting she had ever seen. It was beautiful, but it was also full of sorrow. She said it reminded her of herself. He could not speak. The pain of that statement was too acute. He had looked at his wife and seen a problem to be managed. Director Choi had looked at her and seen a connoisseur of truth. She did not just buy art, the director continued, her voice softening slightly. She supported the artists. She funded scholarships. She created a small foundation, the Siloam Fund, to support emerging painters, all quietly, all under her own name. She paused. Your name, Chairman Kang, is associated with power, with concrete and steel and money. Her name, among a small but very influential circle of people, is associated with culture, with generosity, with honor. That is a form of power too, a quieter, more durable form. Director Choi walked over to a small lacquered cabinet and took out another cream-colored envelope. It seemed to be Min-hee's signature. She left this for you. She said you would understand it after you had seen the peonies. He took the envelope. Inside was not a card, but a photograph. It was a picture of a temple high in the mountains, a simple, elegant structure with a gracefully curved roof. On the back, again, the familiar script. Baekdam Temple. Ask the abbot for the book he is holding for me. He looked at Director Choi. Her face was impassive, but her eyes held a hint of something. Pity? Respect? She is a remarkable woman, the director said. She paid a very high price for your success. I hope you understand that now. He stood up, the photograph in his hand. Thank you, Director, he said. It was all he could manage. He walked out of the gallery, back into the bustling streets of Insadong. The city noise seemed distant, muffled. He felt like a man who had been sleepwalking his entire life and had just been violently shaken awake. He had been so proud of the empire he had built. Now he saw it for what it was, a crude, brutalist structure. Min-hee had been the artist, painting over his concrete with strokes of grace, honor, and humanity. She had not been hiding in the shadows. She had been working in them. The journey was not over. Pusan had shown him her strategy. Seoul had shown him her soul. He looked at the picture of the temple. He wondered what the mountains would show him. The drive to Paekdong Temple was an ascent, both literally and figuratively. The temple was nestled deep in Soraksan National Park, a place of rugged granite peaks, dense forests, and cascading waterfalls. The road grew narrower and more winding as he climbed, leaving the city and its concerns far below. The air grew crisp and cool, scented with pine. Mr. O drove with his usual quiet focus, navigating the hairpin turns with a steady hand. For the first time, Taehyun spoke to him, not as a boss to an employee, but as one man to another. "Mr. O, you knew, didn't you?" Mr. O's eyes met his in the rearview mirror for a brief moment. "Sir?" "About my wife. About the things she did. The kimchi for your mother." Mr. O was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Mrs. Kang is a very thoughtful person, Chairman," he said finally. His voice was neutral, respectful, but the choice of words was deliberate. Not was, is. She noticed things. She noticed my mother was having trouble eating after my father passed. She made a special, soft kimchi, the kind old people can eat. She brought it to our home herself. She sat with my mother for an hour. He paused. She pays attention. There it was again, that word, attention. It was the currency he had refused to spend. "Why did no one tell me?" Daehyun asked, the question raw with a pain he could no longer hide. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mr. O considered this. "It was not my place, Chairman," he said. "And she asked us not to. She said you had important things on your mind. She said her work was to handle the small things, so you could handle the big ones." The small things, managing the emotional well-being of his driver's grieving mother. Weaving a web of influence through the city's cultural elite. Uncovering and fighting a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. He felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat. He had been so busy looking at the sky, he had never realized the ground beneath his feet was a carefully tended garden. They arrived at the temple's entrance as the afternoon sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long shadows across the valley. The temple was quiet, serene. The only sounds were the wind in the pines and the distant chant of a sutra. He left Mr. O with the car and walked up the final stone path alone. He felt like an intruder, his expensive suit and leather shoes a sacrilege in this place of simple robes and straw sandals. He found the abbot in a small courtyard, sweeping fallen leaves with a bamboo broom. The man was ageless, his face a landscape of peaceful wrinkles, his eyes clear and bright. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. "I am Kang Dae-hyun," he said, bowing slightly. "I am here to ask for the book you are holding for Kang Min-hee." The abbot stopped sweeping. He leaned the broom against a wooden pillar and looked at Dae-hyun. It was a look of profound, unjudging perception. It was the kind of look that saw not the chairman, but the man. "She said you would come when you were ready to read it," the abbot said, his voice as calm as a still lake. He gestured for Dae-hyun to follow him. He led him into the temple's library, a beautiful wooden hall filled with ancient texts. The air smelled of old paper and incense. The abbot went to a small, locked chest in the corner and took out a book. It was not an ancient text. It was a modern, hardcover book, a best-selling novel. But when the abbot handed it to him, Dae-hyun saw that it had been hollowed out. Inside, nestled in the cavity, was a slim, black hard drive. "She said this was the last piece," the abbot said, "the final chapter." What did she tell you? Daehyun asked. About me? The abbot smiled, a gentle, compassionate expression. She did not speak of you with anger. She spoke of you with sorrow. She said you had built a house so large you could no longer see the person living in it with you. She said you had mistaken the map for the territory. He paused, his gaze steady. She came here often over the years, to find quiet, to think. She is a person of deep principle. Her actions are not born of vengeance. They are born of a desire to protect. Protect? Daehyun was confused. Protect who? Me? The innocents, the abbot said simply. The families. The employees of your company who have done no wrong. The people who would be swept away if Director Park's betrayal were to cause the Orion Group to collapse. She did not leave you to destroy you. She left you to save you from yourself, so that you, in turn, could save the house you built. The abbot's words were like a key, unlocking the final chamber of his understanding. Her departure, the trail, the lessons, it was all an elaborate, desperate act of protection. She was not just saving him from Park. She was saving the entire ecosystem that depended on him. She was forcing him through a painful rebirth so he could emerge as a leader worthy of the responsibility he held. It was the most ruthless and the most loving act he had ever witnessed. Where is she? Daehyun asked, his voice thick with emotion. The abbot looked at him, his eyes seeming to weigh Daehyun's soul. He was assessing him, just as Min-hee had done all those years ago. Daehyun met his gaze, holding nothing back. He let the abbot see the shame, the regret, the dawning, painful clarity. He did not try to perform strength or control. He was simply a man who had lost his way and was finally, desperately, trying to find his way back. After a long moment, the abbot gave a slight nod. He took a small piece of paper from the sleeve of his robe and handed it to Daehyun. On it was another address, a simple one. A small seaside town on the East Sea, a place known for its quiet beaches and fishing boats. She said that if you came this far, you would earn the right to speak with her, the abbot said. But she also said this: the conversation you are about to have is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. Daehyun bowed low, lower than he had ever bowed to any man. Thank you, he said. He walked out of the temple, the hard drive in his pocket, and the address clutched in his hand. The sun had set, and the sky was a deep, star-dusted indigo. He felt a sense of clarity so profound it was almost painful. He knew what he had to do. First, he had to see the truth. Then, he had to act on it. He found a quiet bench overlooking the valley and took out his laptop. He plugged in the hard drive. It contained a single encrypted file. The password hint was a question. What was the name of the vase? He froze. The vase. The one he had smashed in a fit of anger all those years ago. He had forgotten it ever existed, but she had not. He closed his eyes, forcing himself back into that moment. The feel of the smooth ceramic in his hands, the explosion of sound, the sight of the blue and white fragments on the floor. It was a Joseon Dynasty replica, something she had bought at a market. She had loved it. What had she called it? He remembered her telling him its name, a poetic name, the cloud pattern vase. He typed it in, the file decrypted. It was an archive, a meticulously organized collection of evidence against Park Jin-woo. There were audio files. Min-hee had somehow managed to record several of Park's incriminating phone calls. There were videos from hidden cameras showing Park meeting with shady brokers. There were mirrored copies of Park's hard drive, email archives, and financial records, all cross-referenced with the ledger from Mr. Bay. It was a case so airtight, so damning that no lawyer could defeat it. It was the work of years, a masterpiece of silent, patient intelligence gathering. As he scrolled through the files, a new message popped up on his secure messaging app. It was from Park. "Chairman, are you all right? I have been trying to reach you. There are some urgent matters. The rumors are flying. We need to present a united front." The casual, helpful tone of the message, the performance of loyalty, was obscene. Before, Dae-hyun would have seen it as a sign of Park's steadfastness. Now, he saw it for what it was, a predator checking on his prey. Park was trying to gauge his state of mind, to see if he was on to him. The game had begun. And for the first time, thanks to his wife, Dae-hyun could finally see the board. The seaside town was a place where time seemed to move more slowly. The waves washed ashore with a gentle, rhythmic sigh. Fishing boats bobbed in the small harbor. The air was clean and salty. It was a place for healing, for rest. He found her in a small rented house with a weathered wooden deck that overlooked the sea. She was not hiding. She was waiting. When he walked up the path, she was sitting on the deck in a simple wicker chair, a book in her lap, a cup of tea on the table beside her. She was wearing a loose-fitting linen dress, the color of sand. Her hair was down, and the sea breeze played with it. She looked rested. The perpetual tension he had grown so used to seeing in her shoulders was gone. Her face, which he had always seen under the harsh lights of formal events or the dim light of their apartment, looked different in the clear, natural light of the coast. She looked beautiful. Not the polished, curated beauty of the woman in his penthouse, but a deeper, more grounded beauty. The beauty of a person who is wholly, unapologetically herself. She looked up as he approached. Her expression was calm, unreadable. There was no anger, no triumph, no fear. There was only a quiet, waiting stillness. He stopped at the edge of the deck, his hands feeling empty and useless at his sides. He had rehearsed 100 speeches in his head on the drive here. Apologies, explanations, promises. They all turned to ash in his mouth. They were just more words, more performance. She deserved more than that. She deserved the truth. "The cloud-patterned vase," he said, his voice quiet. Her eyes flickered with a brief, unreadable emotion. "You remembered." "I remember everything now," he said. "I've been to Busan, to Insadong, to Baekdam Temple. I've seen the ledger, the painting, the archive." He took a breath. "I see." It was the most honest thing he had said in years. She watched him for a long moment, her gaze steady. "Seeing is not the same as understanding, Dae-hyun." "I understand," he said, and the certainty in his own voice surprised him. "I understand that I am a fool. I understand that I built my house on your back and never once thanked you for holding it up. I understand that I was so obsessed with the image of my own power that I became blind to its source. I understand that I hurt you and that I was ashamed of you when I should have been in awe of you." He paused, the words costing him everything and yet feeling like the only currency he had left. "And I understand that you did not do this to punish me. You did this to save us." She looked away from him then, out at the endless gray blue of the sea. "I had 2 plans," she said, her voice soft but clear. Plan A was this one, the trail, the education. It was based on the hope that the man I married 17 years ago was still in there somewhere. The man who was impressed by a woman with a ledger, not a pretty face. The man who saw competence as a virtue. She turned back to him. Plan B was for if you had sent Mr. Cho to find me, for if you had reacted with anger and force instead of curiosity. What was Plan B? He asked, though he was almost afraid to know. The hard drive would have been anonymously delivered to the Financial Crimes Unit of the prosecutor's office. The Heron's Nest would have been liquidated, its assets transferred to a charitable trust, and I would have disappeared, for good. The cold, pragmatic logic of it was both terrifying and deeply familiar. It was how he would have planned it. She had learned from him, indeed. She had learned his methods, but applied them to a different moral calculus. "You did it to protect the families," he said, echoing the abbot's words. "If Orion collapses, hundreds of people lose everything. Park wouldn't care. He'd take his money and vanish." "He would have," she corrected. "But his stolen money is no longer in his control. It's in mine. In the ledger of the Heron's Nest. He is a snake with no venom." She had not only exposed him, she had defanged him. It was brilliant, a strategic masterpiece. "What happens now?" he asked. She finally gestured to the empty chair opposite her. He sat. It was the first time they had sat face to face, as equals, in a very long time. "Now we fix it," she said, "together. You have the power of the chairman, the name, the authority, the network. I have the intelligence, the evidence, the trust of the people you overlooked." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Park thinks you are weak right now, isolated. He will be making his move. He will try to consolidate the other families, to paint you as unstable. He will call for a vote of no confidence." "Yoon already told me they were meeting without me," Daehan said. "Yoon is an old fox," Min-hee countered. "He is not with Park. He is waiting. He is waiting to see which way the wind blows. He respects strength, but he values stability more. We need to show him that we are the stable option, that we are the future." She laid it out with the same cool precision she had used on that repayment plan all those years ago. It was a shared operational countermove. She had the strategy. He had the assets to execute it. For the first time, they were truly partners again. "First," she said, "you will call a full board meeting of Oryong. You will present the initial findings of an internal audit. You will not name Park yet. You will simply announce that you have uncovered significant financial irregularities and that you are launching a full investigation. This will put everyone on notice and freeze all of Park's internal movements. Second," she continued, "you will call Yoon. You will tell him you know about Park. You will tell him you have the situation under control and that you have irrefutable proof. You will ask for his temporary neutrality in the interest of a clean, quiet resolution that does not destabilize the entire ecosystem." "And third?" he asked, already feeling the thrill of the fight, a feeling he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "Third," she said, a small, grim smile touching her lips, "you and I will use the evidence on that hard drive to dismantle Park's entire network, piece by piece. We will contact the banks he used, the offshore agents, the brokers. We will use his own methods against him. We will not destroy him with a cannonball. We will suffocate him with paperwork." It was a plan of quiet administrative annihilation. It was her style. It was elegant, and it was lethal. He looked at his wife, this woman he had hidden in the back of rooms, and felt a surge of admiration so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. She was not just the vault. She was the strategist, the general, the queen on the chessboard. "There is one more thing," he said. He reached into his pocket and took out the platinum wedding band he had found on his pillow. He placed it on the table between them. "When this is over," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I would be honored if you would consider wearing this again." She looked at the ring, then back at him. Her face was unreadable. She did not reach for it. "Let's save the house first," she said. "Then we can talk about how to rebuild it." The answer was not a yes. But it was not a no. It was a condition. It was a project. It was a beginning. And for now, it was more than he deserved. It was enough. The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled, coordinated action. They worked from the small seaside house, which became a temporary war room. The transformation in Daehyun was immediate and total. The lethargy of his confusion was gone, replaced by the sharp, decisive focus that had made him chairman in the first place. But this time, his focus was guided. He was the weapon, but Min-hee was the hand that aimed it. They worked as a seamless unit. He made the calls, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, but the talking points were hers, drawn from her years of observation. She sat beside him, passing him notes, pointing to names in her ledgers, providing the human context he had always lacked. The first call was to the board of Oryang. As Min-hee predicted, the announcement of an internal audit into financial irregularities sent a shockwave through the company. It was a show of strength, a declaration that the chairman was not asleep at the wheel. It also had the immediate effect of locking down all major financial transfers, effectively caging Park within the corporate structure. The second call was to Chairman Yoon. This one was more delicate. Daehyun did not command or threaten. He spoke with a new, uncharacteristic humility. "Yoon-si," he said, using a respectful, almost familial term. "I have been a blind man. I owe you my thanks for opening my eyes." He then laid out the situation with Park, not in detail, but with enough clarity to communicate absolute control. "I have the proof. It is damning, and it is total. I am handling it. I ask for your patience. I will clean my own house, and I will do it without spilling dirt in yours." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Daehyun could picture the old fox, weighing the odds. "Your wife," Yoon said finally. "Is she with you?" "She is right here," Daehyun said, looking directly at Min-hee. "She is my partner in this." "Good," Yoon said, and the relief in his voice was palpable. "That is good. You have your 48 hours of neutrality, Daehyun. Settle your affairs." The line went dead. It was a major victory. Yoon's neutrality meant the other families would not move against him. It bought them the most valuable commodity: time. Now came the third phase, the administrative strangulation of Park Jin-woo. They worked through the night. Min-hee's files were a revelation. She had mapped out every shell corporation, every false invoice, every corrupt middleman Park had used. They started with the international banks. Daehyun, using specific arcane clauses from Oryang's corporate accounts, placed holds and queries on the very accounts Park used for his scheme. He didn't accuse, he simply initiated internal compliance reviews, citing international anti-money laundering protocols. The banks, terrified of regulatory scrutiny, immediately froze the accounts. Park's offshore liquidity vanished in a matter of hours. Next, they contacted the small, discreet law firms and accounting agencies in places like Panama and the Cayman Islands that Park had used to create his corporate maze. Min-hee had compiled dossiers on these firms, including details of other unrelated clients. Daehyun's calls to them were brief and pointed. He made it clear that he knew about their dealings with Park and implied that a quiet disengagement from Park would be far less painful than a formal complaint to financial regulators that might entangle their other, more powerful clients. One by one, Park's corporate shelters dissolved. It was like watching a building being deconstructed in reverse. They were removing the nails, the beams, the foundation, until there was nothing left to stand. Throughout the process, Park himself was sending a flurry of increasingly frantic messages. Chairman, the banks have frozen our reserve accounts. What is going on? Chairman, our partners in Singapore are not responding. We need to act. Daehyun, please answer me. Are you safe? I am worried. The performance of concern was wearing thin, cracking under the pressure. Daehyun felt a cold satisfaction in ignoring them. He was no longer playing Park's game. He was forcing Park to play his. Or rather, theirs. As the second night bled into the second day, a call came in that changed the equation. It was from Mr. Cho, Daehyun's silent head of security, the one man whose loyalty had never been in question. Chairman, Cho's voice was as calm as ever. An update. Director Park is not at his home or office. He has gone to ground. But he did one thing before he disappeared. He used his authority as a director to call an emergency meeting of the family elders for tomorrow morning. The agenda? A vote on your fitness to lead. This was the antagonist's lateral surprise. Park knew he was cornered financially. He could not run. So instead of fleeing, he was moving to seize power from within. It was a desperate, bold gambit. He was betting that he could use the rumors of Daehyun's instability, his wife's departure, and the frozen accounts to paint a picture of a chairman who had lost control. He would position himself as the steady hand needed to save the organization from its erratic leader. The clock is ticking, Min-hee said, her face grim. The elders are old-fashioned. They respect tradition and strength. A formal vote is dangerous. If they lose faith in you, they will back Park, proof or no proof, just to maintain order. The arithmetic was stark. They had less than 24 hours. They had crippled Park's finances, but he was making a direct play for the heart of their power, the loyalty of the old guard. Daehyun looked at Min-hee. The fatigue was evident on both their faces, but in her eyes, he saw not fear, but a fierce, burning intelligence. They listened to Yoon, Daehyun said. But there are two others, Elder Kim and Elder Lee. Their families are smaller, but their votes are crucial. They are the wavering allies. What do we know about them? Min-hee asked, already pulling up her files. Kim is a traditionalist. He values honor above all else. Lee is a pragmatist. He cares about the bottom line and the safety of his people. Daehyun remembered his past dealings with them. He had always been dismissive of Kim's obsession with protocol, and he had bullied Lee in several business deals. He had treated them as subordinates, not peers. I need to call them, he said. No, Min-hee said, stopping him. You cannot call them with demands. You cannot call them from a position of weakness, asking for their help. That is what Park is counting on. We have to reverse the dynamic. She thought for a moment. We need to offer them something. Something that proves your strength and fairness. Something Park cannot offer. She began to type on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Elder Kim's grandson was recently rejected for a position at a major university. It was a source of great family shame. Elder Lee's shipping routes have been squeezed by a new competitor in the South China Sea. She was pulling details from her vast, invisible network of knowledge, the small things he had never bothered to learn. She was finding their points of pain, their points of need, and she was formulating a plan not to exploit them, but to address them. The clock consumption gambit had begun. It was a race to win the trust of the men he had spent years alienating, and the only way to do it was to finally start paying attention. The phone calls to Elder Kim and Elder Lee were the most difficult of Taehyun's life. They required him to dismantle his own ego, brick by brick. Min-hee sat opposite him, coaching him, reminding him of the goal. This was not about winning an argument. It was about earning trust. He called Elder Kim first. The old man's voice was stiff and formal. Chairman Kong, this is unexpected. Elder, Daehyun began, his voice measured and respectful. I am calling to offer my sincerest apologies. I have been distracted of late. I have not given you and the council the respect you are due. That is a failure on my part, and I will answer for it. He let that sink in. An apology from Kang Dae-hyun was unheard of. I have also heard of the trouble concerning your grandson, he continued. I have a friend on the university's board of trustees. I believe your grandson's application may have been overlooked. I have taken the liberty of asking my friend to review it again on its merits. I believe they will see the quality of the young man you have raised. He was not offering a bribe. He was correcting an injustice, using his influence not as a hammer, but as a key. He was restoring the elder's family honor, the thing Kim valued most. There was a long silence. Why would you do this? Elder Kim asked, his suspicion clear. Because, Daehyun said, and the words came from a place of newfound truth. Our organization is a family, and we must take care of our own. I have not been a good head of the family. I intend to change that. He did not ask for the elders' vote. He did not mention Park. He simply made the gesture and ended the call. Now, Lee, Min-hee prompted. He dialed the number. Elder Lee was blunt. Daehyun, I'm listening. But make it quick. I have a meeting to prepare for. Elder Lee, Daehyun said, matching his pragmatic tone. I know about the pressure on your southern shipping routes. The competitor is aggressive. I have reviewed their corporate structure. They are over-leveraged. I believe a targeted disruption to their supply chain in Singapore, combined with a competitive price adjustment from Oryong Logistics, would force them to the negotiating table within a month. He was offering a strategic partnership. He was offering a solution to Lee's biggest business headache, using the full power of the Oryong Group, not to dominate him, but to support him. That would be costly for you, Lee said, skeptical. Short-term costs for long-term stability are a wise investment, Daehyun replied, using the language of pure business. A strong partner is more valuable than a weak competitor. I have been a poor partner to you in the past, Elder. I would like to rectify that. Again, he did not ask for the vote. He presented a new reality, a new vision of his leadership, one based on mutual benefit, not unilateral power. As he hung up, he felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also of lightness. He had spent his entire career performing strength. He was only now learning what it meant to actually be strong. Strength was not about making demands. It was about having the capacity to give. While he had been on the phone, Min-hee had been working her own channels. She had been in quiet contact with the wives of the other smaller family heads. She was not spreading gossip or making accusations. She was simply reassuring them. She was projecting calm, stability, and control. She was telling them, in her own subtle way, that the house was not on fire. The house was being renovated. The final piece of the plan was Mr. Cho. Daehyun called him. Find Park, he said. Don't engage, just locate him. I want to know where he is when his world falls apart. The hours ticked by. The sun rose on the morning of the emergency meeting. Daehyun and Min-hee drove back to Seoul in silence. She had changed into a simple but elegant dark blue dress. She looked not like